Something interesting is happening at Social Security offices across America right now. Millions of people are walking in, sitting down, and filing for their retirement benefits at the earliest age the government allows, 62. And they're doing it even though they've heard the same thing you've probably heard. Wait. Wait longer. The check gets bigger. Everyone says so. But this hasn't stopped roughly a third of eligible Americans from claiming at 62 anyway. And what's more surprising, it's not just people who desperately need the money. Researchers at the Urban Institute have been tracking the data, and what they found is that even higher-income Americans, people who by every financial measure have the ability to wait, are increasingly filing at 62. People who don't need the check, people who absolutely understand what delayed retirement credits look like. So the question worth asking is not whether these people understood their options. They clearly did. The real question is, what did they know or see or calculate that made 62 make sense for them regardless? That's what pulled me into a rabbit hole of government reports, behavioral surveys, and some academic research that kept me up way later than I'm proud of. Because what comes out the other side of all that research is not a story about financial ignorance or impatience. It's a story about a generation of Americans navigating a genuinely complicated decision in a genuinely uncertain world, and doing it with a lot more logic than the financial headlines typically give them credit for. I'm Maddie, and today I'm here to tell you why millions of Americans are choosing to claim Social Security at 62 regardless. Let's get into it. Before we get into the reasons, let's just look at how many people we're actually talking about here, because I think it puts everything in perspective. According to Social Security Administration data, about 31% of eligible Americans claimed their benefits at age 62 in 2024, nearly a third. And it's not slowing down, it's actually accelerating. From January through July of 2025, more than 2.3 million people filed for Social Security retirement benefits overall. That's a 16% jump compared to the same period in 2024, a 16% spike in a single year. So clearly, something is going on beyond simple financial need. Let's talk about what that something actually is. Reason 1. People aren't buying break-even math. The entire wait-to-claim argument rests on a concept called the break-even point. The idea is simple. Yes, your monthly check is smaller if you claim at 62, but eventually the higher monthly payment from waiting will catch up and surpass the total you'd have collected by claiming early. But retirees are actually running this math themselves, and a lot of them are not as impressed as the advisors want them to be. Here's what the numbers look like in practice. If your full retirement age benefit is $2,000 a month and you claim at 62 instead, you're collecting roughly $1,400 a month, about 30% less. That $600 monthly difference sounds painful, but from 62 to 67, while you're waiting, the early claimer has already collected $84,000 in payments that the person who waited hasn't seen a dollar of yet. The break-even point, the age at which the person who waited finally comes out ahead in cumulative dollars, lands somewhere around 79 or 80 years old, depending on the scenario. And here's what retirees are apparently thinking. That is a long time to wait for math to work out in your favor, especially when you're 62 and you're not entirely sure what 79 looks like for you personally. The average life expectancy for an American man who reaches age 62 is around 83. For women, it's closer to 86. Those are averages, which means a substantial portion of the population is going to land below those numbers. And for those people, claiming early and collecting more total lifetime dollars is not a mistake. It's the correct call. Reason 2. A lot of people aren't choosing 62. 62 is choosing them. This one might be the most important finding in all the research, and it's the one that gets glossed over in the typical should you claim early conversation. A 2024 survey by the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that 58% of retirees left the workforce earlier than they had planned, not because they wanted to, because something happened. Layoffs, health problems, a spouse who needed caregiving, a company that downsized right before their planned retirement date, an industry that changed so fast that their skills were suddenly irrelevant. Life, in other words, doing what life does. Research from the Economic Policy Institute found that 1 in 2 U.S. workers over 50 have physically demanding jobs, and slightly more than half of those report working in hazardous or unhealthy conditions. Construction workers, nurses, warehouse workers, truck drivers, millions of Americans whose bodies have been absorbing punishment for decades. For these workers, the conversation about claiming at 62 versus 70 is not really a strategic financial planning discussion. It's more like, can I physically continue to do this job for another 8 years? And for a lot of them, the honest answer is no. When your body forces the retirement decision before your spreadsheet was ready for it and you suddenly have no income, you take Social Security. You take it at whatever age you're at when it happens. And for millions of Americans, that age is 62. Reason 3, the Social Security Trust Fund is not exactly looking healthy. This one is less about personal finances and more about trust, or the lack of it. Schroeder's 2025 U.S. retirement survey asked Americans why they were claiming Social Security early, and 38% of early claimers cited fear that the system would run out of money as a contributing factor. Nearly 4 in 10 people, that's not a fringe concern, that's a mainstream anxiety. And it's not without a factual basis. The Social Security Trustee's most recent annual report projects that the program's combined trust funds could be depleted as early as 2034, less than a decade away. Now, depletion doesn't mean the program disappears. Payroll taxes would still be coming in and covering a significant portion of benefits, but it does mean there's a realistic scenario where benefits get cut somewhere in the range of 20% or more unless Congress acts. The couple profiled in a recent AARP investigation summed it up perfectly. They were nervous about stock market volatility eating into their savings, and they'd heard members of Congress talking about Social Security's financial sustainability problems. So they filed earlier than they had planned. Their reasoning, in their own words, they wanted to have their foot in the door. They figured that if Congress did something drastic, they might be grandfathered in as existing beneficiaries and protected from the worst of any cuts. Is that guaranteed? No. Is it a completely irrational fear? Also no. When the program's own trustees are projecting trust fund depletion within 10 years, locking in your benefit now rather than gamble on what the program looks like in 2034 is a form of risk management. Reason 4. For some people, the investment math actually flips. Here's a wrinkle that doesn't get nearly enough airtime in the mainstream conversation about early claiming. The standard break-even analysis almost never accounts for what you could do with the money you collect early. Financial researchers have noted that when you factor in investment returns on early Social Security payments, the math of waiting becomes considerably less clear-cut. The traditional simplified break-even calculation just compares nominal dollars. It treats $1,400 today and $1,400 in 2035 as equivalent, but financially speaking, they're not. If a retiree is collecting $1,400 a month starting at 62 and doesn't need every cent of it for immediate living expenses, maybe they have a pension, a spouse still working, or other savings, that money can be invested. At a conservative average annual return of around 7%, which is well below the historical average of the S&P 500, the investment growth on those early payments significantly changes the total wealth picture. For people in this situation, researchers have found that the financial advantage of waiting can shrink dramatically, or, in some scenarios, disappear entirely. This is part of why even higher income and financially sophisticated retirees are increasingly claiming at 62. They're not doing it out of ignorance or desperation. They're doing it because when they actually modeled their full financial picture, including the investment potential of early payments, waiting doesn't produce the slam-dunk advantage that the simplified break-even math implies. Reason 5. Retirees understand something that spreadsheets don't capture. Now we're getting into the territory that's hardest to quantify, but seems to be a very real driver of early claiming decisions, and it might actually be the most honest reason of all. Retirees are reporting that they want to enjoy their retirement while they're physically capable of doing so. At 62, statistically speaking, you're likely in better health than you will be at 70, 75, or 80. You can travel more easily. You can be more active. The window for certain kinds of retirement experiences is wider now than it will be later. According to U.S. News, a meaningful portion of early claimers aren't doing it because they're broke. They're doing it because they want extra funds specifically for travel, for supporting family members, and for pursuing things they've been putting off for decades of working life. That's a deliberate quality of life calculation.
It's someone saying, I would rather have $1,400 a month right now while I can use it fully than $2,000 a month at 70 when my ability to use it the same way may have diminished. There's no financial model that can accurately value the experience of taking a road trip at 63 versus 73. There's no spreadsheet that accounts for the fact that your knees cooperate differently at different ages. Retirees are making a holistic calculation about their lives, and it's a calculation that pure financial math simply is not designed to make. Reason 6. The earnings limit is less scary than people assume. One of the traditional warnings against claiming at 62 is the earnings limit. If you're still working and you claim Social Security before full retirement age, your benefits get reduced. In 2026, $1 in benefits withheld for every $2 you earn above $24,480 annually. But what researchers and financial educators have been noting is that many retirees, especially those in the part-time work, part-time retirement phase of life, are discovering that this limit doesn't actually affect them the way they feared. If you're 62, winding down your career and earning under that limit through part-time or consulting work, the earnings restriction is simply not a factor. And for those who do have benefits withheld, that money isn't gone. The Social Security Administration adjusts your benefit upward later to account for those withheld months. It's not a permanent penalty, it's more of a timing shift. Once retirees understand that nuance, that the earnings limit is more of a timing adjustment than a permanent penalty, the fear of it goes away. And that fear was one of the things keeping some people from claiming early even when it might have made sense for them. Reason 7. They earned it and they know it. And finally, this reason shows up in virtually every survey and study about early Social Security claiming, and it's the most straightforwardly human explanation of all of them. Social Security is not a government gift. It's a deferred benefit funded by decades of payroll tax contributions from every paycheck a worker ever received. The average worker who spent 40 years in the workforce paid into this system through good years and bad years, through recessions and recoveries, through jobs they loved and jobs they endured. And at 62, a lot of those workers look at a system that has been debating its solvency, watched by a Congress that periodically floats benefit cut proposals, and decide, I'm not waiting anymore. I paid for this. I'm collecting it. That's not unsophisticated thinking. That's not financial illiteracy. That is a values-based decision that prioritizes ownership, certainty, and personal agency over the promise of a larger future check. And many Americans are making it. Here's where we land after looking at all the data. The picture of the typical early Social Security claimer that emerges from the research is a lot more complex and a lot more reasonable than the stereotype suggests. These aren't people who didn't get the memo about delayed claiming. These are people who ran their own math, assessed their own health, looked honestly at their own physical limitations, factored in the program's financial uncertainty, evaluated what the money could do for their lives right now versus later, and came out on the other side with the conclusion that 62 made sense for them. Some of them are correct. Some of them, from a pure lifetime wealth perspective, might have been better off waiting, but the decision is never made in a vacuum, and it's almost never made irrationally. What the surge in early claiming really reflects is something deeper. A generation of Americans who have worked hard, watched the rules change around them repeatedly, learned to trust their own judgment when institutions have given them reasons for uncertainty, and decided to take the sure thing over the projected thing. Whether that's the right call for any individual depends entirely on their specific health, finances, family situation, and values. But the reasons behind the trend, they're a lot more thoughtful than the financial headlines give them credit for. That is the story behind the numbers, and it is genuinely one of the most interesting retirement finance stories happening in America right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, when do you plan to claim and what's driving that decision? And if you're not subscribed yet, come on, join us. We post every week and we try to make every video worth your time. All right, that's a wrap, and thanks for watching.